Let our faith be more than anthems, greater than the songs we sing. In our weakness and temptations, we believe, we believe. We believe in God the Father. We believe in Jesus Christ. We believe in the Holy Spirit, and He's given us new life. We believe in the crucifixion. We believe that He conquered death. We believe in His resurrection, and that He's coming back again. We believe. Let the lost be found and the dead be raised in the here and now. Let love and faith, let the church live loud. Our God will save. We believe, and the gates of hell shall not prevail. For the power of God has torn the veil. Now we know your love will never fail. We believe, we believe. We believe in God the Father. We believe in Jesus Christ. We believe in the Holy Spirit, and He's given us new life. We believe in the crucifixion. We believe that He conquered death. We believe in His resurrection, and that He's coming back. He's coming back again. He's coming back again. We believe, we believe.
Hi, welcome to 7th and 8th grade, junior Sabbath school, and today is May 23rd. It's Sabbath, and happy Sabbath. And I want to introduce my guests here today since we're still social distancing. We have a very, very small class. So we've got Charlie Putnam. Can you say hi, Charlie? And Jasmine.
Hello.
Yes, thank y'all for coming. And so we want to open up with Charlie. He's going to pray for us.
Dear Jesus, thank you that we're all here today via other medias or being here, and thank you that we all get to explore your word today. Please help everybody who can't watch with us or be with us today, and help them to enjoy their Sabbath in whatever they may be doing. Please help those who may have COVID, and thank you that even though this is affecting us in such big ways, that we still don't have to stop studying your word just because COVID's come around. In your name I pray, amen.
And now it's time for our mission story.
Thank you, Miss Aaron. Zofia Kluska received Theodore when she was a tiny 3-month-old baby. Father bought Theodore from the store and placed the cuddly black and white panda bear with a small green blanket on Zofia's bed in Dynia, Poland. It was love at first touch. Zofia formed a close relationship with her new friend. Wherever she went, Theodore went. Theodore became an important member of the family. He attended church, he traveled across the country for visits to grandfather and grandmother, and he posed in all the family pictures. But one awful day, he disappeared. Zofia was 3, and she went for a long walk with the babysitter. They played on the playground, swam in the Baltic Sea, and walked up and down the beach. When they returned home, Theodore was nowhere to be found. Zofia immediately prayed, "God, please let me find Theodore," she said. At first, Father and Mother thought Theodore hadn't gone on the walk with Zofia. They searched the house, under beds and in cupboards, in the bathroom and on the living room sofa. No Theodore. Mother placed Zofia in the stroller, and she and Father retraced the path that Zofia and the babysitter had taken earlier. They went to the playground, they followed the path to the Baltic Sea, and they looked on the sandy beach. No Theodore. Father and Mother were worried about putting Zofia to bed that night. She had slept with Theodore every night since she was 3 months old. Before bedtime, Zofia prayed for Theodore. She didn't cry, but it was hard to sleep. In the morning, Mother made posters with Theodore's photo. She wrote with a marker, "Lost, a cuddly toy, a little panda with a green blanket, was lost somewhere around here. He is very special for a little girl and our family. Reward." Mother placed the posters at the playground, on the path to the Baltic Sea, and on the beach. Maybe someone would find Theodore and call. Theodore was not found. Father went to the toy store to look for Theodore. He couldn't find the panda with the green blanket, but he did see a nice orange lion. At home, Zofia wasn't excited to receive the lion. Father turned on his computer and looked for Theodore on eBay. Nothing. He remembered that the store where he had found Theodore was owned by a Swedish company. He contacted the company's main office in Poland, but the manager said that Theodore wasn't in any stores in Poland. Father decided to try one last thing. He wrote an email to the Swedish company's headquarters in Stockholm. In the letter, he explained that Zofia had lost Theodore and that Theodore was an important member of the family. He asked whether the company had seen Theodore in Sweden. The company manager wrote back that he was also a father, and he felt very sad that Theodore had gone missing. "We have a special warehouse where we keep one sample of every item that we have ever designed," he said. "Theodore is there. I will send him to you." 2 days later, a special express package arrived at Zofia's home. Father eagerly tore it open and took Theodore to Zofia. "Look who has returned home from a long trip," he said. Zofia was so happy. Today, Zofia is 8 and she takes Theodore everywhere. Mom and Dad keep a close eye on Theodore and never let him out of their sight. They don't want to lose him again. Thank you for your 13 Sabbath offering 3 years ago that helped Hope Channel open a studio in Poland so people can learn about Jesus' soon coming in the Polish language.
Amen. So we are going to start out with a game, and what we're going to do is I'm going to show a video, and we've all agreed that babies are the hardest being to look at and not smile. So we're going to show a video of a baby, and we're going to see who smiles first. They're not supposed to smile. So whoever smiles first is the loser. Okay? So, here we go.
The song stopped. What did you find? So good.
So nasty. Eli! I'm pretty sure Jasmine's smiling.
I was first.
better.
No, Charlie was first.
On this one?
We
I
can.
smiled like minutes before her. Nobody was looking though.
Ha. Ha.
I'll look at the footage. We'll
I
see
just
what-
let myself smile because we are not going to sit here trying not to smile at baby videos for hours.
I just want to get it over with. Okay, guys, so obviously you cannot watch babies, adorable babies, fall and do other cute things without smiling, right? So that was like a really easy scenario that I put you in. How difficult do you think it would be to serve others or to get through life if you were placed in a really difficult situation? I mean, if you can't even get through a baby video without smiling. If you were really
Incredibly difficult.
yeah. So we're gonna read our power text. We're gonna put up our power text on the computer TV thingy. It is from Philippians 4:11 through 13, and it is, I am not saying this because I am in need, for I have learned to be content whatever the circumstances. I know what it is to be in need, and I know what it is to have plenty. I have learned the secret of being content in any and every situation, whether well-fed or hungry, whether living in plenty or in want. I can do all things through him who gives me strength. Philippians 4:11 through 13. I just get choked up. Like that verse just chokes me up. I don't know why. It makes me a little emotional.
Yeah.
All we're used to in that situation is it just says, I can do all things, but then hearing the context, it's like Paul's saying, I've been through all this, I can do anything through God. It's not a boast about it, it's a faith thing. I've already been through all this, God's going to carry me the rest of the way.
Yeah. I mean, that is a good way to get through hardship, is when you look back at what you've already been through and you've thought, well, heck, if I can get through that, then I can get through anything with God, you know? So our lesson today is about someone who went through hardship. It's about Paul. And I'm going to go ahead and read an excerpt of, I mean, it kind of sounds like it's a diary, like you said, Charlie, earlier. It sounds like Luke's diary. And then we'll talk about it, okay? On arriving in Rome, I overheard Julius, the Roman centurion, escorting us, tell Paul that he would release him if he could. Paul told him he wouldn't change anything because God had a work for him to do in Rome. He said he was content with that. His positive attitude continues to amaze me. Once we were in the city, Julius made arrangements for Paul to live in his own house with one guard rather than stay at the imperial prison with the other prisoners. He found us a furnished house. At last, Paul can live in a little comfort. He will be under house arrest. That means he will be constantly chained to a soldier, but he can freely preach to all who come through the door. 3 days later, Paul had inquired about the Jewish community here in Rome when he arrived. He discovered that there was once again a large population of Jews. He sat reminiscing about his friends Priscilla and Aquila, whom he had met when they were banished from Rome years before. He repeated his belief that you can serve Christ anywhere under any circumstances. I had to agree with him. Today, Paul decided it was time to meet with the Jewish leaders. He wanted to make sure that they got the truth about what had happened in Jerusalem. When they arrived, he stated carefully and simply the reason for his imprisonment. He was surprised they hadn't already heard the details from the Jews in Jerusalem. They were curious about his belief that the Messiah had come. Instead of having to answer questions about his arrest, he was asked to explain to them why he thought Jesus was the Messiah. Paul asked them to meet with him again in 2 days. 2 days later, Paul stated boldly to the Jews that Jesus Christ of Nazareth was the Messiah whom the prophets wrote about. The Roman Jews asked thoughtful questions. Some believed, but in the end, most were unconvinced. Paul reminded them of Isaiah's prophecy about their unbelief. Do you want to read that for us, Charlie? Isaiah 6, 9, and 10.
And he said, "Go and tell this people, keep on hearing, but do not understand. Keep on seeing, but do not perceive. Make out the heart of this people dull, and their ears heavy, and shut their eyes, lest they see with their eyes, and hear with their ears, and understand with their heart, and return, and be healed."
So even after that reminder, some of the Roman Jews became unconvinced, or were still unconvinced. Finally, he said that salvation would go to the Gentiles. It didn't seem to matter to most of these people listening to him. I could tell Paul was disappointed. The important thing is that he used every opportunity to tell what he knew. As he sat there in chains, he said that regardless of the circumstances, he would preach Christ. I have learned the secret of being content in any and every situation, whether well-fed or hungry, whether living in plenty or in want. I can do all this through him who gives me strength, he said. I glanced at the soldier guarding him and saw that even he was moved by Paul's testimony. 2 years later, the Jews from Jerusalem arrived today. Their delay in coming has allowed the work to blossom everywhere. Paul has had time to write letters of encouragement to the churches he established. He has sent workers to these churches as well as to places he was not able to go. A leader in chains. I now understand why Paul said 2 years ago that he was content in any circumstance, no matter how difficult. I have seen our Lord strengthen him for the work, even though his health is feeble. Timothy, Mark, Demas, and Tychicus have been staying with us. Mark has made a dramatic turnaround. He has matured in the Lord very well, and he is completely devoted to Paul. We have had a steady stream of visitors to this house. Heads of states probably don't receive as many people. If I didn't insist that he stop and rest, Paul would talk with people all night, every night. After I repeated it once again today, he looked at me as if he wanted to argue. Instead, he says, "You have been more than a physician. You have been a faithful friend." Lately, he's been introducing me as my beloved physician. I have been grateful for the time with him these past years. I've learned so much about trusting God and continuing to serve him in spite of his difficulties. Wow, what a great example Paul was to all of us. So can you guys think of some ways that Paul served God while he was in not an ideal situation, for sure? I mean, it was great that he wasn't put in the imperial prison and that he was in a house where he could still minister, but he was still chained to a guard and not doing what he wanted to be doing at that time.
Well, I suppose we do have quite a few letters from Paul that survive to this day that he's encouraging all of us and everyone else
That's true.
that he wrote during that time.
Yeah, just like I said earlier, that Bible verse, the one in Philippians, it just gives me chills every time. So when you think back to what we read here, what are some ways that we saw Paul serve God? Like when he brought in the Jewish people, right?
Yeah.
And he tried to convince them of, Jesus. It says that some people were convinced and some were unconvinced, but the few that were convinced, I mean, one person saved is...
Paul served by telling everybody.
Even the soldiers that guarded him, right? And even the disciples that, it would be easy for the other disciples to get discouraged because their leader is in jail, and it'd be easy for them to maybe jump ship at that time, but even it said, who grew in their, it said Mark had a dramatic turnaround. He matured in the Lord very well. So he was even a witness to, the disciples. And when I see people that have gone through hardship, who come out on the other end full of faith and still preaching God's word and still have a belief in God, it inspires me to keep going. And I don't think she would mind if I called her out on this, but Sonia Verheul, who lost her son and her husband a couple years later, she just amazes me. And when I think about any hardship I'm going through, and then I remember her, and I'm like, if Sonia can do it, I can do it.
There's a story in Guide it reminds me of. There was a guy, and he had like a bad childhood, but he was constantly nice to everybody.
Mm-hmm.
And everyone in the mission compound he worked at, even though they weren't Adventist or Christian or anything, he said they'd always come up and say, I want to be like, call him Bob, because we were thinking Bob was going on. And so they'd say, I want to be like Bob. And then the guy would say, well, why didn't I tell you about Jesus? And they'd say, is he like Bob?
Wow.
Because Bob was just always nice to everybody.
Mm-hmm. You know anyone that's gone through hardship, or have you gone through hardship personally that you would want to talk about?
One of my aunts, actually, she was in a car crash with her entire family, and they all survived except for, because I had she had just given, I had my baby cousin. She was like I don't think she was even when you're old, and she didn't survive. And I don't think my aunt wasn't supposed to survive either, but she survived.
Wow.
And well, it was hard for everyone, because I wasn't born at that time, but I know she's fine now, and it's all, because even then we expected her, if she survived, to have at least maybe paralyzed somehow, but she's perfectly fine.
Wow.
It's amazing.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
That is amazing. We watched this movie last night called I Still Believe, and it's about this Christian music artist named Jeremy Camp. Y'all know Jeremy Camp? If you've heard the song, you've heard his music. I know you have.
Okay.
Probably
Feels familiar.
Probably just don't know that it's a Jeremy Camp song, but the movie was about how he met his wife, and they met in college, and it's kind of their love story. And then when she was 21, she got a tumor in her ovary, and it was cancer. And she went through cancer treatments, and I'm going to tell everybody the movie. You still go watch it. But she went through cancer treatments. She was healed. They actually opened her up to do a surgery, and she was healed, cancer-free. But then maybe 6 months later, it came back, and she ended up dying. And so you're excited. You're like, whoa, what a miracle! Which it was a miracle. She was healed for a period of time, and but then after she passes away, he's really angry and stops believing in God, or struggling with his belief in God at that time, and he finds a letter that she had written to him, and it was basically saying, if what I've gone through has led one person to God, it's worth it, basically. Just her faith and her attitude towards her death, because I think she probably kind of knew it was happening or going to happen. Anyways, it was her faith that pulled him out of that junk he was going through with his unbelief. And anyways, there's more to the story. I didn't tell everything. So I wanted to, when I was probably your age, I read this book called The Hiding Place, and it's about this woman during the Holocaust. Corrie ten Boom was her name, and her family, they were Christians, and I think it was Holland, and they started hiding Jews because they disagreed with the policies of the Nazis and everything. And her and her sister ended up going to they got caught, and they ended up going to a concentration camp.
Now, in this week's episode of Preposterous People, I want to talk about a woman by the name of Corrie ten Boom. Now, Corrie and her sister Betsy lived in Holland during World War II. These women were Christian women, and it is because of their faith in Jesus that they saw what the Nazis were doing to the Jewish people, and they decided to hide Jewish people in their homes. And they did this for many years until they were found out by the Nazis. And once they were found out by the Nazis, they themselves were put into a concentration camp and left to work and die. Now, it was in Ravensbrück concentration camp that unfortunately Betsy died right before the Allied soldiers were able to rescue them. Now, in the years after the war, Corrie went back to Germany to preach about Jesus and forgiveness. And after she was done one day preaching in a church, a man came walking up to her. He was a German soldier, and she recognized him as he approached her. He was one of the German soldiers who were in that concentration camp when she was there. And all of these emotions started flooding up in Corrie's mind. What is she going to say to this man? This Nazi soldier walked up to her and said, "I need to ask you for forgiveness. Since the war, I've become a Christian, and I realized the horrible things that I did to people, and I want to say I'm sorry." Now, Corrie was faced with an almost impossible decision. She had just got done preaching about Jesus and about forgiveness, and now she is face to face with one of the people who is very much responsible for the death of her sister. She wrestled as to what to do, for what she said seemed like an eternity. She wrote about this story, and I want to read it to you. Corrie said, "And I still stood there with the coldness clutching my heart. But forgiveness is not an emotion. I knew that too. Forgiveness is an act of the will, and the will can function regardless of the temperature of the heart. Help," I prayed silently. "I can lift my hand. I can do that much. You, Lord, supply the feeling." And so woodenly, mechanically, I thrust my hand into the one stretched out to me. And as I did, an incredible thing took place. The current started in my shoulder and raced down my arm, sprang into our joined hands. And then this healing warmth seemed to flood my whole being, bringing tears to my eyes. "I forgive you, brother," I cried, with all of my heart. For a long time, we grasped each other's hands, the former guard and the former prisoner. I had never known God's love so intensely as I did then.
Okay, so what do you guys think about this video about Corrie ten Boom and how she showed service for God under a very difficult time?
I think that it was nice that even though she was having trouble forgiving, she worked out her part, she did what she could, and then she let God do the rest. And really, I think that was a tremendous show of faith that God could do that and would change her heart, that even though this man was completely responsible for thousands of deaths, and even her own hardship, he was responsible for that too, and she still thrust out her hand and God changed her heart for her.
Yeah, that was amazing. What did it say what'd she say? Forgiveness is an act of
Will.
the will.
And the will can function without emotion, regardless of the temperature of the heart.
Oh, you got a good memory, Charlie.
I don't.
I did PDE. It sucks. I remember everything. You're at 5 minutes and then I can forget it. So.
Yeah. So yeah. I mean, you're absolutely right. Like, forgiveness is an act of service, and sometimes we have to. I mean, forgiveness doesn't happen on our own. I don't think.
It's a choice. It's not something that's going to happen. It's a choice on both sides for you and the person you're forgiving. It's good for both sides, and it's letting go of the blame and just accepting this person, even though they did that, they're here now and they're sorry for it and they're trying their best to be a good person. And most friendships would be over if forgiveness didn't exist.
Right.
Because
So-
we're human and we make mistakes.
Even if we can't, even if the forgiveness doesn't come on its own, we can at least ask God to give us the desire to forgive. We can do that much, So,
Well, there's the difference. Forgiving and forgetting. You always should forgive, and you should forget when you can, and God's going to help you take away from the pain of it, and you can just eventually not forget, but not,
harbor like resentment.
yeah, just accept that it happened, and that God had a plan in it, and I think it gets easier as you look back as well, because you can see how God worked through it.
Right. So there's all these ways that we can show service under hardship. And so let's think about this week as we're going through our own struggles. Let's think about it, and how most of the time we're just with our families, right? And so let's think about how we can serve God with our families or adults. If you're going to work still, how you can do it at work. How you guys can do it on your Zooms when people are getting on your nerves. And
These people won't mute themselves after
Yeah.
baby screaming in the background.
All right, Jasmine, can you close us off with prayer and make sure we ask God for help with all these things?
Yeah. Dear Heavenly Father, thank you for this wonderful day today. Thank you that today is Sabbath, and even though we're not seeing each other face to face, we can still learn about you and help us to apply the things that we learned today. Help us to apply them to our daily lives and help us have a good rest of the day. We love you so much, and we hope to see you soon. In your name we pray, amen.
Amen.